Grandma deserves to know the truth. Those 6 words stopped every conversation at my dining table and turned an ordinary family dinner into the moment that changed everything. 1 second, I was reaching for the basket of dinner rolls. The next, every person in the room was staring at my granddaughter Sophia. Even now, I can still remember the exact expression on her face. She was not angry. She was not emotional. She looked determined. The kind of determined that comes only when someone has spent a long time carrying a secret they can no longer keep. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 72 years old, and that evening began like dozens of family dinners before it. I had spent most of the afternoon cooking. A roast chicken sat in the center of the table. Fresh vegetables filled serving bowls. Candles flickered softly beside the dishes. For a few hours, everything looked exactly the way I had always wanted it to look. My son Ethan was there. My daughter-in-law Jennifer sat beside him. Sophia had arrived early and even helped me set the table. We laughed. We shared stories. We talked about work, school, and weekend plans. If someone had taken a photograph of us during those first 30 minutes, they would have seen what appeared to be a perfect American family. Looking back, that was exactly what made what happened next so shocking. Halfway through dessert, Sophia slowly stood from her chair. At first, I thought she wanted to make a toast. Her 18th birthday had been a few weeks earlier, and she was preparing to leave for college in the fall. I expected her to thank everyone for coming. Instead, she looked directly at me. "Grandma," she said quietly, "there is something you should have known years ago." The room became silent. Ethan immediately shifted in his seat. Jennifer froze with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. I felt a strange chill move through me even though the house was warm. Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. It looked worn, as if it had been opened many times. She placed it carefully on the table. No one spoke. No one moved. "Sophia," Jennifer finally said, forcing a smile. "This is not the time." But Sophia did not sit down. She did not look away. "Actually," she replied, "this is exactly the time." I glanced at Ethan, hoping he would explain what was happening. Instead, he looked pale. The kind of pale that appears when a person already knows what is coming. My heart began to pound. For years, there had been moments that never quite made sense. Small things, missing conversations, unanswered questions, strange decisions that always seemed to leave me confused. Suddenly, I had the unsettling feeling that every one of those moments was connected. And whatever was inside that envelope was about to tell me why. For several long seconds, nobody touched the envelope. The candles continued flickering in the center of the table. The scent of coffee and apple pie still lingered in the air. Everything looked normal, yet the atmosphere had completely changed. I remember looking from Sophia to Jennifer and then to Ethan. All 3 faces told different stories. Sophia looked determined. Ethan looked worried. Jennifer looked frightened. That was the moment I realized this was not some misunderstanding. Whatever was inside that envelope had been hidden for a very long time. "Sophia," I said gently, "what is this?" My granddaughter swallowed and glanced down at the documents before looking back at me. "It is something I found 6 months ago," she said. Jennifer immediately pushed back her chair. "Enough," she said sharply. "This is a family dinner. We can discuss this another time." Her reaction surprised me. Jennifer had always been composed. In 20 years, I could count on one hand the number of times I had seen her lose control. Yet now her voice carried an urgency that made everyone uncomfortable. Sophia did not sit down. "That is exactly why it needs to happen now," she replied. Ethan rubbed his forehead and stared at the table. He still had not spoken a single word. I found that almost more unsettling than Jennifer's reaction. My son was never silent during family disagreements. He always tried to calm situations. Tonight, he seemed unable to look at me. As I watched him, old memories began resurfacing. Small moments I had ignored for years. Invitations that never arrived. Phone calls that suddenly stopped. Family decisions that seemed to happen without my knowledge. At the time, I convinced myself that life was simply changing. Children grow up. Families become busy. People move in different directions. That explanation had comforted me for a long time. Sitting at that table, I started wondering if I had been comforting myself with a lie. Sophia slowly opened the envelope and removed several papers. They looked old. Some corners were bent. Others contained handwritten notes. "Grandma," she said softly, "before I show you these, there is something important you need to know. I did not go looking for a secret. I found it by accident." Her voice trembled slightly for the first time. That told me how much this mattered to her. Last winter, I was helping Dad clean boxes in the attic. Ethan finally closed his eyes. Not dramatically, just briefly, as if he already knew exactly where this story was heading. Sophia continued. "One box had documents that were not supposed to be there. At first, I thought they were old financial records. Then I started reading. The room fell silent again. I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room ticking away the seconds. Each tick seemed louder than the last. And deep inside, I began to fear that the family I thought I understood was built on something I had never been meant to see." "Reading what?" I asked quietly. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Sophia looked at me for a moment before lowering her eyes to the papers in her hands. "Letters," she said. "A lot of letters." Jennifer immediately stood up from her chair. "Sophia, stop." The sharpness in her voice startled everyone. Even Sophia looked surprised. For years, Jennifer had been the person who handled every difficult situation with a smile and careful words. Seeing her lose that control only deepened the uneasiness spreading around the table. "Mom," Sophia said softly, "I already know." Jennifer looked toward Ethan as if waiting for him to intervene. He remained silent. His shoulders seemed heavier than they had an hour earlier. I had never seen my son look so defeated. Sophia carefully removed several folded documents from the envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. "The first thing I found was a letter Grandma wrote to Dad 11 years ago," she said. My heart skipped. 11 years ago. I immediately remembered that period. It was around the time communication between us had started changing. Calls became less frequent. Visits became shorter. Family gatherings felt different. At the time, I assumed everyone was simply busy building their own lives. Sophia unfolded one of the letters. "Grandma invited Dad and Mom to Thanksgiving," she explained. "She offered to host the entire family." I nodded slowly. I remembered writing that invitation. I also remembered never receiving a response. Jennifer folded her arms tightly. "People miss letters," she said. "It happens." But Sophia shook her head. "That is what I thought too." She reached into the envelope again and produced another document. "Then I found this." Ethan lowered his head. Sophia continued. "It was a note attached to the original invitation." The room felt impossibly still. Even the grandfather clock seemed quieter now. "The note was addressed to Dad," Sophia said. "It said the invitation had been received and that he planned to attend." I stared at Ethan. Slowly, he looked up. The sadness in his eyes told me more than words could. "You were coming?" I asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes." The answer barely rose above a whisper. A memory flashed through my mind. Thanksgiving Day. An empty dining room. Extra chairs around the table. Food growing cold while I waited for family members who never arrived. Eventually, I had packed away the leftovers and convinced myself something unexpected must have happened. Sophia carefully placed the documents in front of me. "There are more," she said. "A lot more." My hands trembled slightly as I looked at the papers. Every page represented a moment I thought had been forgotten. Every document seemed to connect another missing piece of a puzzle I had been trying to understand for over a decade. And for the first time, I began to suspect that many of the disappointments I blamed on distance had never been accidents at all. The more documents Sophia placed on the table, the harder it became to breathe normally. Every page seemed to pull another thread from a sweater I had spent years trying to mend. I picked up one of the letters and immediately recognized my own handwriting. It was addressed to Ethan. The date in the corner stopped me cold. It had been written 9 years earlier, shortly before Sophia's 9th birthday. I remembered that year clearly because it was the year I missed her birthday celebration for the first time. At the time, I had been told the gathering was small and limited to a few friends from school. I accepted the explanation. Families change. Traditions change. I told myself not to take it personally. Sophia carefully slid a photograph toward me. My hands froze. The picture showed a large backyard party filled with relatives, neighbors, and classmates. Decorations covered every table. Balloons floated above the lawn. Nearly everyone I knew was there. Everyone except me. The image hurt more than I expected. Not because I had missed a party, but because I suddenly understood that the exclusion had not been accidental. There were dozens of pictures like this, Sophia said quietly. I found entire albums. Jennifer looked away. She could no longer meet anyone's eyes. Ethan remained silent, but I noticed tears forming at the corners of his eyes. I never knew you were not invited, he finally whispered. The room immediately shifted. Jennifer's head snapped toward him. Ethan, she said sharply. He shook his head before she could continue. No, I need to say this. It was the first time all evening that my son sounded certain of anything. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen in years. Shame. I thought you stopped coming because you were upset with us, he said. That is what I was told. The words landed heavily between us. Suddenly dozens of confusing memories began arranging themselves into a pattern. Family gatherings where people seemed surprised I was absent. Phone conversations that felt strangely distant. Relatives who acted as though I had chosen to withdraw from the family. For years I blamed myself. I wondered if I had become difficult. I wondered if age had made me less welcome. Now another possibility was emerging. Sophia reached for another document. There is more, she said. A lot more. Her voice remained calm, but I could tell this was painful for her too. No teenager wants to discover that the foundation of her family is built on misunderstandings and hidden decisions. She opened a folder and removed several printed emails. These are conversations between Mom and other relatives, she explained. Jennifer immediately stood again. That is enough. But this time nobody listened. For the first time in many years, the truth seemed stronger than anyone's attempt to stop it. And as I looked at the growing stack of papers, I realized the secret was far bigger than a missed birthday or a forgotten invitation. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The stack of documents sat in the center of the table like a silent witness to years of confusion. Sophia carefully picked up several printed emails and looked directly at me. These were the hardest things to read, she said quietly. Jennifer remained standing, her hands gripping the back of her chair. Ethan stared at the table. I could see him struggling to process everything unfolding around him. Sophia unfolded the first page. Most of these messages were sent between Mom and different relatives over several years. Her voice remained steady, but I could hear sadness beneath it. They all tell the same story. My heart tightened. What story? I asked. Sophia glanced down at the page. That you did not want to be involved anymore. The words hit harder than I expected. I felt as though all the air had left the room. For years, I had wondered why cousins stopped calling. Why old friends seemed distant. Why invitations slowly disappeared. I assumed people had moved on with their lives. I never imagined they believed I had chosen to walk away from them. Sophia continued. There were messages saying you preferred being alone. Messages saying you were tired of family gatherings. Messages saying you wanted less contact. I shook my head slowly. None of it was true. Family had always been the most important part of my life. Even after disappointments, I never stopped hoping things would improve. Jennifer finally spoke. I never meant for things to go this far. Her voice sounded fragile. It was the first time that evening she had spoken without anger or defensiveness. Sophia looked at her mother. But it did go this far. The sadness in those words seemed heavier than any accusation. Ethan lifted his head. Is that why Aunt Rebecca stopped calling? Sophia nodded. And Uncle Mark. And several others. A painful memory surfaced immediately. Years ago, I had sent Christmas cards to relatives who never responded. I remember sitting by the window after the holidays wondering if the mail had been lost. Now another explanation stood before me, one built from years of misunderstandings and assumptions. Sophia reached for another page. "There is one message that changed everything for me," she said. The room became still again. She handed the document to Ethan first. I watched his eyes move across the page. His face turned pale. Then he passed it to me. The message was short. It claimed I no longer wanted regular contact with the family because I felt overwhelmed and preferred a quiet life alone. At the bottom was a sentence that stopped me cold. "Please respect Margaret's wishes and give her space." I looked up slowly. Jennifer had tears in her eyes now. For the first time all evening, nobody seemed interested in defending the lie. Because the truth was finally sitting in front of all of us. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument could have. I looked down at the message again, reading the words over and over as if they might somehow change. They did not. For years, people I loved believed I had chosen distance. They believed I no longer wanted to be part of birthdays, holidays, and family milestones. The realization hurt in a way I had never expected. Not because of what had been said, but because of how many years had been built on that false foundation. Ethan slowly pushed his chair back and stood. His eyes remained fixed on the papers spread across the table. "I remember this," he said quietly. Everyone turned toward him. "Jennifer told me Mom wanted more privacy. She said Mom felt overwhelmed and preferred fewer family obligations." His voice cracked slightly. I believed it. Nobody interrupted. For the first time that evening, every person in the room seemed focused on the same thing. The truth. Jennifer wiped tears from her face. "I never thought it would become permanent," she whispered. "At first, I only wanted less tension. I thought creating some distance would make things easier." Sophia looked at her mother with sadness rather than anger. "But every year it became a little more," she said. Jennifer nodded slowly. Yes, the honesty in that single word carried years of regret. I sat quietly, listening. Part of me wanted answers. Another part already knew that no explanation could return the lost time. Missed birthdays would remain missed birthdays. Empty chairs would remain empty chairs. Yet hearing the truth mattered. It mattered because confusion had finally been replaced by understanding. Ethan picked up another document from the table. His hands trembled slightly. "There are messages here from relatives asking why Mom never attended family gatherings." He paused. "And every reply says the same thing. Nobody needed him to continue. We already knew. The pattern had become impossible to ignore." Across the table, Sophia gently gathered several pages into a neat stack. "When I first found all of this, I thought there had to be some mistake," she said. "I spent months looking for evidence that would prove everyone innocent." Her eyes moved from Jennifer to Ethan and finally to me. "Instead, I found more proof." The grandfather clock in the living room chimed softly. Outside, darkness had settled completely over the neighborhood. Inside, it felt as though a different kind of darkness was finally lifting. Jennifer stared at the table for several long seconds before speaking again. "There is one thing none of you have seen yet." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Every head turned toward her. Slowly, she reached into her purse and removed a sealed envelope. "This is the reason Sophia found everything," she said. "And it is the one document I hoped nobody would ever read." Jennifer placed the sealed envelope in the center of the table and slowly withdrew her hand. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for it. For years, that envelope had remained hidden, and somehow we all sensed that whatever was inside would explain more than any document we had seen so far. The room felt smaller than before. The candles had nearly burned down. Dinner plates sat untouched. What began as a family gathering now felt like a reckoning that had been delayed for more than a decade. "What is it?" Ethan finally asked. Jennifer stared at the envelope for several seconds before answering. "A letter I wrote 12 years ago." Her voice sounded exhausted. "I never intended anyone to find it." Sophia looked confused. "Then why keep it?" Jennifer gave a sad smile. "Because part of me always knew I would need to face it one day." Those words settled heavily over the table. Slowly, she pushed the envelope toward Ethan. He opened it carefully and removed several folded pages. As he began reading, I watched his expression change. First confusion, then disbelief, then something much deeper, regret. When he finally lowered the pages, his eyes were filled with tears. "Mom," he said quietly, looking at me. "I do not know how to say this." My heart tightened. "Say what?" Ethan swallowed hard. "The letter is about you." The silence that followed seemed endless. Jennifer lowered her head. Sophia looked from one parent to the other, trying to understand. Ethan took a deep breath and continued. 12 years ago, Jennifer wrote that she was afraid. He paused. "Afraid that I listened to you too much. Afraid that your opinions carried more weight than hers. Afraid that she would never feel like the center of our family." Jennifer closed her eyes. "I was insecure," she whispered. "I thought if I could create distance, Ethan would focus entirely on our household." No one interrupted her. "At first, I convinced myself it was temporary," she continued. "I told myself everyone would adjust. Then every small decision made the next one easier." I listened quietly. Strangely, I felt less anger than I expected. What I felt instead was sadness. Sadness for the years lost to fear, assumptions, and choices that grew larger over time. Ethan looked back at the letter. "There is another part." His voice cracked. "Jennifer wrote that if enough people believed Mom wanted distance, eventually it would become the truth." Sophia covered her mouth. Jennifer began crying silently. Not dramatic tears, just the quiet tears of someone finally confronting the consequences of their own decisions. I stared at the envelope, realizing that the mystery which had haunted so many years of my life was no longer a mystery. The confusion was gone. The unanswered questions were gone. In their place stood a painful truth. But as difficult as that truth was, it revealed something else. For the first time in many years, nobody around that table was hiding anymore. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The truth had finally been placed in the open, and there was nowhere left to hide from it. I looked around the table at the people I loved most and realized that every one of us was grieving something different. Ethan was grieving the years he could never recover. Sophia was grieving the family she thought she knew. Jennifer was grieving the consequences of choices she could no longer undo. And I was grieving the simple moments that had quietly disappeared from my life while I searched for explanations that never came. Jennifer finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red, but her voice sounded steadier than before. "There is something else I need to say." Nobody stopped her. Nobody argued. The need to defend the past seemed to have vanished. "For years, I convinced myself that I was protecting my marriage," she said. "I told myself that creating distance would make our family stronger. Every time something felt wrong, I created another explanation. Every time someone asked questions, I gave another answer. After a while, I stopped noticing the difference between protecting myself and hurting everyone else." Ethan lowered his eyes. Sophia remained silent. I listened carefully because for the first time, Jennifer was not trying to justify anything. She was simply telling the truth. "The worst part," she continued, "is that after enough years passed, I started believing my own version of events." That statement stayed with me. It explained more than any document on the table. Sometimes people do not wake up intending to damage a family. Sometimes they make one fearful decision, then another and then another until the path back becomes difficult to see. Jennifer wiped away a tear. "I cannot change what happened. I cannot give those years back." The room remained quiet. Outside, a light wind moved through the trees beyond the dining room windows. The ordinary sound felt strangely comforting after such an extraordinary evening. Sophia reached across the table and gently touched my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried years of unspoken emotion. "Grandma," she said softly, "I am sorry it took so long." I squeezed her hand and smiled. "None of this is your fault." Her eyes filled with tears. For months she had carried a burden that never belonged to her. Yet she had also done something remarkable. She had refused to ignore the truth once she found it. Ethan slowly stood and walked to the window. His shoulders looked heavier than I had ever seen them. "I spent years thinking I was keeping peace," he said quietly. "Now I realize I was avoiding difficult questions." He turned toward me. "And you paid the price for that." I could see how deeply he meant those words. The distance that had existed between us for so long suddenly felt smaller than it had at the start of the evening. Not gone, but smaller. And for the first time in many years, I sensed that our family was no longer being shaped by secrets. It was finally being shaped by honesty. The conversation continued long after the food had grown cold. Nobody seemed interested in clearing the table. Nobody seemed eager to leave. For years, our family had avoided difficult truths. Tonight, there was nowhere left to run from them. I sat quietly, looking at the faces around me. Ethan appeared exhausted. Sophia looked relieved and emotional at the same time. Jennifer seemed smaller somehow, as though carrying the weight of the truth had finally become heavier than carrying the lie. I realized something important in that moment. The secret itself was painful, but the uncertainty had been worse. For more than a decade, I had blamed myself for things I did not understand. I had questioned my worth. I had wondered whether I had somehow become a burden to the people I loved. Now I finally knew what happened. The knowledge hurt, but it also brought a strange sense of peace. Ethan slowly returned to his chair and sat beside me. "Mom," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology that is years overdue." I looked at my son. For the first time in a very long time, I saw the same young man who used to call me every Sunday afternoon. The same boy who used to ask for advice before every important decision. "I should have asked more questions," he continued. "I should have listened more carefully. I should have paid attention when things stopped making sense." His voice trembled. "Most of all, I should have called you." Tears filled his eyes. Mine did too. Not because I wanted an apology, because I had missed my son. Sophia reached over and wrapped an arm around his shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it reminded me how much she had grown. She was no longer the little girl whose birthday parties I missed. She was a young woman strong enough to confront uncomfortable truths in order to protect the people she loved. Jennifer sat quietly for a long moment before finally speaking. "I do not expect forgiveness tonight," she said. "Honestly, I do not know if I deserve it." Nobody interrupted. "But I am sorry, not because I was exposed, because I finally understand what my choices cost everyone else." There was no defensiveness left in her voice. No excuses, only honesty. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. Outside, the night had become still. The wind had faded. The neighborhood was quiet. It felt as though the world itself had paused long enough for our family to catch its breath. I looked around the table one final time before speaking. "The secret did not destroy this family," I said softly. "The lie did." Everyone remained silent. "But the truth gives us a chance to decide what happens next." Sophia squeezed my hand. Ethan nodded slowly. Jennifer wiped away another tear. None of us could recover the years that had been lost. We could not relive missed holidays. We could not recreate empty seats at old birthday parties. We could not rewrite history. But for the first time in many years, we had something more valuable than a perfect image. We had honesty. As the evening finally came to an end, Sophia helped me gather the dishes. Ethan carried the old documents into the living room. Jennifer quietly folded the letter that had started everything. The family that walked into my house that evening was not the same family preparing to leave it. We were less certain, less comfortable, less perfect, but we were also more truthful. And as I watched them standing together beneath the warm light of my dining room, I realized the thing I had wanted most was never revenge, recognition, or even an apology. I simply wanted the truth. After all those years, I finally had it.